My name is Grace. I'm 24 years old. I used to think that no matter what happened, family would always be there for you. But one winter night, I learned the truth. I still remember standing on the porch, snow falling all around me, my suitcase beside my feet. My parents stood in the doorway, cold and furious. My mom's voice broke the silence. "Don't come back here ever again." I stood there shivering, staring at the only home I'd ever known. Then, with tears freezing on my cheeks, I turned around and walked away. That night changed everything. For 5 years, I built my life from nothing. No calls, no visits, no family. But then, they found out what I'd become. And suddenly, they wished they'd never said those words. Before I tell you what happened when they saw me again, please like this video and comment where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories reach. And don't forget to subscribe, because the truth behind this story will remind you, sometimes being pushed away is exactly what pushes you toward your destiny. The snow was falling so hard that I could barely see the road in front of me. My fingers were shaking as I stood on the porch, holding a small backpack pressed against my chest. My father's voice cut through the cold like a blade. "Don't come back here ever again." For a moment, I couldn't even breathe. The wind howled between us, and the porch light flickered, throwing long shadows across his face. I kept waiting for him to say something else, to tell me it was just anger talking. But he didn't. He just stared, his eyes as cold as the night itself. Behind him, I could see my mother standing in the hallway, her hands covering her mouth. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she didn't move. She never did when he spoke like that. Ethan stood beside her, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. I thought I saw the smallest smirk tug at the corner of his lips. It had all started an hour earlier. My father had found the letter, the one from the art academy I had secretly applied to. I had been accepted, full scholarship. It was everything I had dreamed of. But when he saw it, he didn't see success. He saw betrayal. "You lied to us," he shouted, slamming the letter on the table. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? Running off to chase paint and paper?" I tried to explain that it wasn't betrayal, that it was my dream, but my words bounced off the walls like echoes no one heard. My father's voice grew louder, my mother's quieter, until she said nothing at all. Then he told me to pack my things. Now here I was, standing outside, snow soaking through my boots, the air biting at my skin. "Dad, please," I whispered, my voice cracking. "Just listen. I didn't mean to hide it from you, But he stepped back and shut the door. The sound of it closing was louder than the wind. It was final. I stood there for a long time, staring at the door, hoping it would open again. It didn't. The light above me blinked once, twice, then went out completely. The whole world went quiet. I took one shaky breath and turned away. My legs felt weak, but I forced them to move. Each step left a mark in the snow, small, messy prints that the wind would soon cover. I didn't know where I was going. All I knew was that I couldn't stay. When I reached the end of the street, I turned around one last time. The house stood still in the distance, warm light glowing from the windows. Inside that house was my whole childhood, my laughter, my drawings taped to the walls, the sound of my mother humming in the kitchen. And yet, tonight, it didn't feel like home anymore. I wiped my tears and kept walking. My backpack felt heavy, even though it held only a few clothes, a sketchbook, and a pencil case. I clutched it tighter, like it was the only piece of myself I had left. The snow kept falling, covering my footprints behind me. It was as if the world was erasing any proof that I'd ever belonged there. I didn't look back again. That night, I walked away from everything I knew, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. And though I didn't know it then, that night would be the one they'd spend years wishing they could take back. The first few nights in the city were the hardest. I slept in a small hostel room that smelled like damp wood and cheap detergent. The bed creaked every time I moved, and the thin blanket barely kept out the cold. I kept telling myself it was only temporary, that I'd find something better soon. But deep down, I knew I had nowhere else to go. During the day, I walked the streets with a folded piece of paper in my pocket, the acceptance letter from the art academy. I'd read it so many times that the corners were soft and torn. Each time I looked at it, I felt both proud and guilty. Proud because I'd earned it. Guilty because I'd lost my family because of it. I got a job washing dishes in a small cafe near the train station. The owner, an old man with kind eyes, didn't ask questions. He just handed me an apron and said, "You look like you could use a start." The pay was small, but it was enough for food and rent. Every night after work, I sat by the window, sketching faces I saw during the day. People rushing, smiling, arguing, living. Drawing made me feel alive again. One morning, as I was sketching on a park bench during my break, I heard a soft voice say, "You draw just like your mother used to." I looked up and saw a woman in her 50s, wearing a long gray coat and a knitted scarf. Her eyes were gentle but sharp, as if they had seen too much. "I'm Clara," she said, "your mother's sister." The name made my chest tighten. I'd heard of her. My father used to call her the rebel of the family. They hadn't spoken in years. She told me she'd recognized me from an old family photo my mother once showed her. When I explained what had happened, she didn't look shocked, just sad. "He's always been proud," she said softly, "but pride doesn't keep you warm at night." Clara offered me a place to stay, a small apartment above a bookstore she managed. I hesitated at first, afraid of being a burden, but she smiled and said, "You'd be doing me a favor. I could use the company." Living with Clara was different. The house was filled with books, plants, and old paintings. She never shouted. She never judged. She'd leave me little notes in the kitchen. "Breakfast is on the stove. Don't forget to breathe." For the first time, I felt like someone saw me. With her encouragement, I enrolled in the art academy. It wasn't easy. I worked in the cafe during the day and studied at night, but I didn't mind. Every brushstroke felt like a small victory, proof that I hadn't given up. My professors noticed my dedication. Some even started displaying my work at small local fairs. One of my paintings, a cold, snowy landscape with a single girl walking into the distance, caught people's attention. They said it felt lonely but alive. I smiled when I heard that. They didn't know it was my story. A year passed, then 2. I got better, stronger, happier. Clara became like the mother I wished I'd had. One who listened, who didn't try to change me. Sometimes when the night was quiet, I'd think of my parents. I wondered if they ever thought of me, if they missed me, if they even knew I was okay. One evening, as I was cleaning my brushes, I came across a photo tucked between my old sketchbooks, a picture of my family from years ago. We were smiling. The house behind us looked warm and alive. I stared at it for a long time. Then I placed it face down and kept painting. Because even though I had lost my home, I had finally found where I belonged. 5 years had passed since that night in the snow. 5 winters, 5 birthdays, 5 quiet Decembers without a single call from home. I was 24 now, living in a small apartment with sunlit walls and paint stains on nearly every surface. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. My artwork had begun to draw attention. Local galleries started inviting me, and people were actually buying my pieces. It still felt strange when someone asked me to sign my name on the corner of a painting. Clara would joke, "You're going to be famous one day, Grace?" And I'd laugh, shaking my head. I didn't care about fame. I cared about feeling seen. Then one morning, as I was sorting through the mail piled under my door, I found a small cream-colored envelope with my name written in a shaky hand. The handwriting made my heart skip. I knew it instantly. My mother's. I stood frozen for a moment, staring at it. The paper was slightly wrinkled, the ink smudged. I sat down at the kitchen table, my fingers trembling as I tore it open. Inside was a folded sheet of paper, and when I began to read, my chest tightened. "My dear Grace, I know I don't deserve to ask for anything after all this time. Not after the way we let you go. Things have changed here. Your father is not well. His heart condition has worsened, and the business, it's gone. He's lost so much, Grace. We all have. Ethan left home months ago. He made mistakes, ones I can't even bear to write down. Your father doesn't say it, but he regrets that night. Every day he looks out at the road and waits. Maybe for you. If you can forgive us. If you can forgive me, please come home. Even just once. With love, Mom. By the time I reached the end, my eyes were wet. My chest ached as if the words had reached inside and reopened old wounds I'd tried to seal shut. I folded the letter and placed it on the table, staring at the wall in silence. The sound of the clock ticking suddenly felt louder than ever. For years I had imagined that day, the day my family would reach out. But now that it was here, I didn't know what to feel. Anger, sadness, relief? Maybe all three. When Clara came home and saw the letter on the table, she didn't ask how I got it. She simply sat across from me and said softly, "You're thinking about going back, aren't you?" I nodded slowly. "I don't know if I can," I whispered. "What if nothing's changed? What if he still sees me as a mistake?" Clara smiled faintly. "Then let him see what a beautiful mistake you turned out to be." That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing my father's voice in my head, cold and final, telling me not to come back. But my mother's words kept echoing too. "Please come home." I walked around the apartment looking at my paintings, each one a piece of my journey. The snowy landscape, the girl walking alone, the light breaking through clouds. Every canvas told a story of pain, but also of survival. By morning, I knew my answer. I packed a small bag, not because I was leaving forever, but because I needed to face what I had left behind. I needed to look them in the eyes and see what 5 years of silence had done to us. As I zipped the bag shut, Clara placed a warm hand on my shoulder. "Go," she said gently. "It's time." I looked out the window. Snow had begun to fall again, soft, quiet, endless. The same snow that had fallen the night I walked away. Only this time I wasn't running. I was going home. The drive back home felt longer than I remembered. Every road sign, every snow-covered tree looked familiar but distant, like echoes of a life I'd once lived. The sky was gray, heavy with clouds, and the air smelled of winter and old memories. When the cab finally stopped in front of my parents' house, I almost didn't recognize it. The bright yellow paint that used to shine in the sun was now dull and cracked. The front yard, once neat and full of flowers, was overgrown with dry grass. The fence leaned slightly to one side. It looked tired, just like the people who had once filled it with laughter. I stood there for a while, bag in hand, trying to steady my breath. Then I walked up the steps and knocked. The door opened slowly. My mother stood there, her eyes wide, her hand covering her mouth. For a second, we just stared at each other. Then she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. "Grace," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You came." I felt her body shaking against mine. Her hair smelled like the same shampoo she used when I was little. I wanted to cry, but I couldn't. My chest felt too tight for tears. When she pulled back, I looked past her and saw him, my father. He was sitting in his old armchair by the fireplace, a blanket over his knees. His face was thinner, his hair grayer, and there was a faint tremor in his hands. For the first time in my life, he looked small. He didn't say anything, just nodded once and turned his gaze back to the fire. I stepped inside. The house felt colder than I remembered, not just in temperature but in spirit. The ticking clock on the wall filled the silence between us. The walls that once held family photos now had only empty nails. My mother tried to fill the quiet with small talk, asking about the city, about my art, about Aunt Clara. I answered politely, though I could feel my father's eyes flicker toward me now and then, quick and guarded. At dinner, no one spoke much. The table felt bigger than before, even though it hadn't changed. When I reached for the salt, our hands brushed, and he flinched slightly. I pretended not to notice. Afterward, I went upstairs to my old room. The moment I opened the door, the memories rushed in. The posters I'd once taped to the wall were gone, replaced by blank paint. My sketchbooks were missing from the shelves. but the faint scent of paint and pencil still lingered in the air. I sat on the bed, tracing the marks I'd carved into the wooden frame years ago, tiny stars I'd drawn when I couldn't sleep. For a moment, I felt like that girl again, the one who dreamed too big for this small house. Later that night, I walked into the living room. My father was still awake, staring at the fire. The orange glow flickered across his face, highlighting the deep lines around his eyes. "Do you need anything?" I asked softly. He shook his head. "No," he said after a long pause. His voice was weaker than I remembered. "Just sit." I did. The silence between us was heavy, but not sharp like before, more like a space waiting to be filled. Finally, he spoke. "You did well for yourself." I looked at him, surprised. He didn't meet my eyes. "Your mother shows me your paintings," he continued quietly. "They're good." It wasn't much, but it was more than I ever thought I'd hear. When I went back upstairs that night, I stood by the window, watching the snow fall over the garden. Everything felt smaller. The rooms, the walls, even the distance between us. But in that smallness, something fragile had begun to shift. For the first time since that night, I didn't feel like a stranger in my own home. The snow kept falling for days after I returned. It covered the yard, the fence, the mailbox, soft and quiet, like a blanket over all the things we'd left unsaid. Inside, the house felt still. My mother moved slower now, and my father spent most of his time by the fireplace, wrapped in silence. I helped where I could, cooking, cleaning, keeping the place from falling apart. Every morning, my mother would bring tea to my father, and I'd catch her glancing at me with a faint, grateful smile. It was as if she was afraid I'd vanish again if she looked away. Some evenings, I'd sit in the living room, sketching while the old clock ticked behind me. My father would watch quietly. Once, when I dropped a pencil, he bent to pick it up but winced halfway. I took it from his hand gently, and he gave a small nod of thanks. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. One afternoon, my mother handed me an envelope. "It came for you," she said softly. The letter was from a gallery in the city, an invitation to showcase my work in their spring exhibition. I hesitated. "That's a big opportunity," my mother said, almost whispering. "You should go." I smiled faintly. "I will. But not yet." That evening, I painted in my old room, the same one that had once been stripped bare. I painted the house exactly as it was now, old, quiet, surrounded by snow. But this time I added something new. A warm light glowing through the window, like a promise that healing could live even in broken places. When I finished, I showed it to my mother. She pressed a hand to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It looks like hope." She placed the painting on the living room table, right where my father could see it. For a long time, he didn't say anything. Then, slowly, he leaned forward. His voice was rough, almost breaking. "Did you paint this for us?" I nodded. He looked at it for a long while, then at me. His eyes were red, not from anger this time, but from something softer. "I don't deserve this," he said quietly. "Or you." His words hung in the air. For 5 years, I'd dreamed of hearing something, anything, that showed he'd changed. But in that small, fragile moment, those words were enough. That night, he called me to the living room again. The fire had burned low. He looked tired, weaker than before. "Grace," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I was wrong. I thought keeping control meant keeping the family safe. But all it did was push you away." He paused, staring into the fire. "When you left, I told myself I was teaching you a lesson. I didn't realize I was teaching myself one instead. For the first time, I saw not the strict man who raised me, but a father trying to make peace with his own mistakes. I didn't say much. I just placed my hand over his. It was thin and cold, but he didn't pull away. The next morning, when I came downstairs, my father was sitting in the same chair, but this time he was smiling faintly. The painting was on the wall behind him. The light from the window touched it, making it glow softly. Weeks later, a local reporter came by, wanting to write about my work for the newspaper. When the article was published, the title read, "From the girl they sent away to the artist who came home." The neighbors began whispering, pointing, remembering the night my parents had turned me out. People came to see the painting, the one that now hung proudly in the Coleman living room. I often caught my parents looking at it for long stretches of time, silent, lost in thought. Sometimes my father would reach for my hand and squeeze it gently, as if to say what words never could. And though they never said it aloud, I could see it in their eyes. They wished they hadn't said those words. They wished they hadn't sent me away that night in the snow. But maybe, just maybe, that night was what it took for all of us to finally find our way home. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more.